Hello everyone, welcome back to the Looney Bin. My name is Looney and you're probably wondering what is the Tifa Erasure theory. Now the Tifa Erasure theory isn't like an actual in-game theory where we, talk about like Tifa getting erased or some sort of way in, the remake project, specifically when it comes to part 3 of the Final Fantasy VII Remake project. No, it has nothing to do with that. It has more to do with this idea that a lot of content creators in Final Fantasy VII space have talked about essentially not about Tifa. They've been trying very hard to give you theories that they believe will come true, and theories that could, essentially can happen, but they're not always 100%, certain that it could happen, but it's a theory that, they think that has a possibility. And some of them seem to always revolve around giving Aerith more of a role in part 3 that she didn't technically have, in the OG, specifically the second half of the OG. And while I love Aerith as a character, she doesn't have much of a role in the second half of Final Fantasy VII after her death until, the ending where she is able to use the live stream to save the planet from Meteor. That is a super important part of the, the ending of the story. But there's nothing that happens in between that. Like, she's gone. There's nothing there. And I understand this idea that, because the remake project is changing things, right? They believe that Aerith will play an important role in part 3 in some sort of capacity, right? With it revolving around Cloud and Co. and stuff like that. And even saying things like adding Aerith to the livestream sequence in some form or way. But to me, that's essentially trying to erase Tifa's role in the second half of Final Fantasy VII, where her role is very important to not only her character, but also to Cloud's character, right? And it's like everyone is so afraid to talk about Cloud's role or even Tifa's role, and they want to bring Aerith's role more into focus because they believe that after what we went through in Rebirth and, with some of the changes that have been happening, we instantly want Aerith to have a much more important role in the overarching, last half of the story. And to me, it's like you don't need to have Aerith have like that big role with the party. What you could do essentially is have her journey through the live stream, as a way to find Zack, because it definitely feels like that's what, the devs are trying to lead up to, right? They're trying to lead up to essentially, Advent Children, where we see at the ending of Advent Children, Aerith and Zack, leaving the church, looking back at Cloud, glad that he finally forgave himself, and decides to move on. That's what they're, I believe at least, are essentially leading to. Their journey in the live stream where they meet, right? And then, Aerith learns how to, channel the live stream to save the planet from Meteor. That's what I think they're going to do in part 3 in terms of Aerith. She's not going to be heavily involved, right, with the party itself. Cloud, Tifa, Barrett, Red 13, Yuffie. They're not going to have that much involvement with that party. The only thing you'll probably see in regards to it is some sort of like flashback or maybe Sephiroth or Genova really messing with Cloud's mind in regards to Aerith's death and so on and so forth. I think that's what essentially is going to happen. But many theorists believe that Aerith is going to have a much more important role, specifically in the live stream sequence. They believe that Aerith will have some sort of influence in the live stream sequence to bring back the real Cloud. The problem is that it doesn't fit with the narrative and it doesn't fit with what the OG did, right? They are not trying to change, the major story beats of the story. I think a lot of people seem to believe that they are going to do that, but they're not, right? Sure, you could have had that thought and that idea after the, the ending of Remake, but as you play through Rebirth, alongside with some additions, so much, subtractions, some changing, parts of like, how you meet certain characters or when you visit certain places, those kind of changes and stuff like that. They're still following the major story beats. It's not like they're changing things. If they were trying to change something, they would have done something where Aerith somehow survived, right? That wouldn't, you see, it wouldn't make sense that they would suddenly just change everything in part 3. They're following the major story beats properly as they did, as it was, I should say, in the OG. It's not that they're changing so many of the major story beats. They're not doing that, right? So why would they do that in part 3? Why would they add certain characters, add certain things in part 3 that were never there in the original story? Sure, you could have some small minor changes. You could have Cloud's mom in the life stream sequence, because at least Cloud's mom has some sort of impact with who Cloud really is, his real identity. There is something there in regards to it. Zack is going to be in the life stream sequence, but only as a memory, because that memory, of Cloud wanting to be a soldier and him pretending to be, Zack, that's going to be part of the life stream sequence, because guess what? It was in the original too. So it's like, I get this idea that you want, Aerith to be more, have much more of a role in part 3, but she's not going to, in my opinion. It doesn't make any sense. And by doing this, you're trying to erase Tifa's role, trying to erase Tifa's importance in part 3. You may not think that way. You may not think you're, trying to insinuate that, but you are. Because you're trying to put Aerith in situations where Tifa's role is that. That's why her role is important. She's the one who helps find Cloud, Cloud's real identity. She's the one. Because she, alongside, maybe, memories of like the whole situation with Cloud's mom, is going to help him find, the real Cloud. So it doesn't make any sense, because Aerith doesn't necessarily know the real Cloud. She's seen glimpses. She's seen moments where Cloud is definitely acting very different than what she thought, Cloud was, which was, someone who just acted like Zack. She even mentions that she knows that, Cloud isn't Zack, that there's, that Cloud is, his own person, but she has never met that person. So how can she help? That's literally trying to erase Tifa's role by adding her to like some sort of like situation in life where she can help find the real Cloud, but she can't, because she doesn't know the real him, right? So it's like, I don't understand why like there's this weird Tifa erasure thing that's happening for by theorists, by fellow Final Fantasy VII content creators, because of my guess is that they want to stay neutral and not want to get involved in like some sort of shipping war, or get some, fans, offended by not including Aerith in part 3's, important parts. But like, why? Like, no, you could follow the story. Just because a couple of shippers don't want you to not talk about Aerith, or like talk about Cloud and Aerith or whatever, doesn't mean that you have to completely diverge away from what the OG, what the original story is talking about. The devs have constantly talked about, not changing the original story by much. They've just been adding, subtracting certain things, changing some really small things. But they never change any of the major plot points, right? There's been videos talking about how, like, who will really save Cloud? Who will really find Cloud's real identity? And automatically, some people even just mention that Aerith will be able to do it. Like, no, you're erasing Tifa's important role in the live stream sequence. Like, what her character arc is connected to Cloud, their relationship, sorry, let me just calm down a little bit. But like, Cloud and Tifa's, relationship as characters, right? Not even shipping related, is interconnected because of their, of their connection with the Nibelheim incident, and all that stuff. Like, come on, it's so frustrating. Like, I don't understand why Final Fantasy VII content creators want to stay neutral, and by doing so, and by being afraid of shippers getting at them, that they're, trying to make everyone happy. But at the same time, when you try to do that, you're essentially making other people unhappy, because you're trying to take away something that that belongs to their favorite character, right? Also, the same thing with Zack, by the way. Some people think that Zack's, Zack's story or like Zack being included in the remake project is some sort of fan service. Clearly, it's not, because it's all going to be connected in some important way. Yet, so many content creators believe that Zack is a fan service, that there's nothing going on, that there's no point of him being in the story, that the devs are literally trying to tell you in some sort of way that Zack's role is important. In fact, Zack's whole existence helps make the Final Fantasy story even happen, because he's the one who saves Cloud. There's even like some Crisis Core erasure happening because they believe that Crisis Core doesn't belong in the lore. It doesn't belong at all with the remake project or even the OG, because some people are just upset that Zack has a role with another character that is much more intimate, a much stronger relationship, and they hate that. No, you don't have to cater to them. You don't even have to cater to me, right? I just want you to really understand what Tifa's role is in the story and why are trying to add other characters or try to implant other characters into like her important scenes is something that you shouldn't be doing. Why is everyone so afraid of that, right? I get it. You have biases. Everyone has biases. I have biases. That's great. But at least I'm not trying to remove Aerith's important role. I'm not trying to put Tifa into her role. I'm not trying to make Tifa into etc. I'm not trying to, find a way where Tifa's connection to the live stream is going to be the reason why, the live stream saves the planet. No, I'm not doing that, because that's not what's going to happen. That's not her role. Her role is to help Cloud, save Cloud, and then be able to defeat Sephiroth alongside Cloud and the rest of the party, so that Aerith then has the opportunity to channel with the livestream to save the planet from Meteor. You see how every single character has some sort of role, right? Every single character has some sort of role. And yet you're trying to implant other characters into Tifa's sections, Tifa's role, Tifa's importance in part 3, the second half of the story, because you want to stay neutral, you want to appease a certain crowd. No, that's not how it should work. You shouldn't be afraid of that, right? I get it. You may have some sort of theory that Aerith may, somehow survive or play an important role. Great, but that doesn't mean you have to implant her into Tifa's scenes. You could have her be at some other point, in the story for the second half. Any other point, but don't try to put her or force her into scenes that like belong to Tifa. And it's just or try to say Tifa's a fan service character or Zack is a fan service character and they don't belong here, there, whatever, right? It makes no sense to me. That's what this Tifa erasure theory is. It's this idea that Tifa's role, Tifa's importance as a character, right, is meaningless and that anyone can do it. Right? That Tifa is not as important as Aerith, because you go through Rebirth and seeing how like Aerith's role in the story is important for that game, specifically for that first half of the story. But then just ignore what the OG does because you think that the devs are going to change everything, when that is not the case. They're going to make changes, but they're going to be small changes. They're going to be additions. They're going to be subtractions. They're going to maybe change certain events, like when we meet certain things, right? Like we could go to Wutai at a certain place that we don't necessarily do in the OG. By the way, Wutai, if I'm not mistaken, I think Wutai is like an optional place you visit anyway, right? But like, you can't just tell people that you think that Aerith is going to have a much more important role involved in a scene that is specifically for Tifa. It doesn't make any sense. It goes against, the fact that the devs are staying true to the story and staying true to the major beats of the story, right? It's just frustrating to see this, and I know some people are probably gonna think that I'm like just loony or crazy, but like, I'm not the one trying to erase Aerith's roles at all. I'm not the one trying to do that. I get it. Aerith is an important character to the story. I'm never, ever going to say she isn't. Because she does a lot. Right? But at the same time, you can't just erase Tifa's roles, Tifa's importance to what the story actually plays out. Right? Because without Tifa, Cloud doesn't ever find his real self again. He just doesn't. And I made videos on this. You could go check him out. Like, it just, I get it. You want things to be different because of like certain, dialogue or certain like, things that the devs have put into their games, like at the ending where like, what is going to happen on this unpredictable journey or whatever the line is, right? You want to use that to, in some sort of way, to predict and theorize something new is going to happen in Final Fantasy VII. And when it doesn't happen, especially when it didn't happen in Rebirth, you feel like you've been insulted, like your intelligence have been insulted, right? Your intelligence hasn't been insulted, right? You just thought that there was going to be something more instead of thinking like, oh, wait, maybe the devs are just doing, and recreating the actual story with minor changes. I get it though, because of the way Remake ended, that, hands on deck for any sort of theory that could have been possible. But as you play through Rebirth and see that a lot of the major, plot points are still the same, you have to realize at that point, like, oh, that I guess that's not happening, and I guess I was wrong in that regard. I am perfectly fine with admitting I'm wrong. If they somehow implant or, put Aerith into a lot of these scenes, like the live stream sequence, I will gladly be wrong, because I'll be like confused, as to why they did it, why they made the changes. But I'll just be like, all right, well, I guess I was wrong then. It's okay to be wrong. It really is okay to be wrong. I've been wrong so many times. I'm a shipper. Half the time I'm fucking wrong, right? But like, come on. We don't need to erase, roles for each different character. We don't need to erase Tifa's role or give, or put other characters into like these specific roles, because each character plays a specific role. And it's just really important that regardless of your bias and regardless of how much you love a character, there are places for that character that don't belong in other characters' moments of the story. There is places. And once you realize that the major story beats are the same, that it's okay that, other characters have their shine, have their moments in the story, doesn't mean you have to add other characters to those moments. You don't need to. You absolutely do not. Because if you try doing that, then you're going against what the OG is. You're going against those plot points, those major plot points. All because you want to be proven right. That your theory, that your, whatever idea or theory that you come up with is correct. And you refuse to believe that you're wrong. It's okay to be wrong. I'm wrong. I admit when I'm wrong. It's perfectly fine. At the end of the day, each character has a role to play. Tifa has a role to play. Zack will definitely have some sort of role to play as well. He's not just a fan service character in the Remake project. He's there for a reason, and we won't know the reason until Part 3 comes out. Because they have been writing this and making sure that everything that they have, told and said will be fixed, or not fixed, but will be connected in some sort of way in Part 3. It's okay. It's okay to be wrong. Each character has a role, and this Tifa Erasure stuff that I've seen a lot of content creators do, I just feel like is just, it's a shame. It's a shame that you have to think like to remove characters or add characters to certain scenes that belong to a specific character and part of her very important role in the story. It's a shame. But again, at the end of the day, we're all fans of Final Fantasy VII, and we should appreciate each character individually, equally, and love each character that we love, right? We have biases, but at the end of the day, our bias should not hinder our own thought process, our own opinions on exactly how the story has been going. So thank you so much for watching my video. Hopefully I, gave you some sort of idea of what I'm talking about, and that, I hope that at least you can understand where I'm coming from. But yeah, just let me know in the comments below if you have any other thoughts. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you guys next time. All right, subscribe to the channel if you want to see more Final Fantasy VII videos. All right, bye everyone.